Welcome to Five Mind Media's Behind the Art Lies the Artist. Join us as we uncover the stories and visions of iconic creators, revealing the genius behind their masterpieces. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the works of Käthe Kollwitz. Käthe Kollwitz, printmaker, painter, and sculptor, was born in 1867 into a well-to-do family of masons who valued education and social justice. She married Karl Kollwitz, a doctor serving Berlin's poorest, and lived among them, seeing their struggles firsthand. But nothing shaped her artwork more than war. She dedicated her art to the women and children left behind, and when she lost her own son, Peter, in World War I, grief became her medium. She trained as a painter, but found her true voice in printmaking. Lithographs, woodcuts, and intaglio. Intaglio is a process where an image is etched or engraved into a surface, usually metal, then inked and pressed onto paper. Kollwitz's woodcutting process was deeply expressive, favoring raw emotion over fine detail. She carved directly into the woodblock, using bold, rough cuts to create stark contrasts. Unlike traditional Western woodcuts, which often prioritize precise line work, Kollwitz embraced a more forceful, almost primitive style, enhancing the drama and intensity of her subjects. She then printed her woodcuts on Japanese paper, a handmade washi paper prized for its softness and ability to absorb ink while retaining fine details. This gave her prints a delicate yet striking quality, balancing the brutality of her imagery with an almost ghostly texture. Deep shadows, sharp contrasts, perfect for capturing the suffering and resistance for which her work is well known. In this video, we'll take a look at some of her more well-known works, many of which can be found today, over a century after their creation, in the Käthe Kollwitz Museum in Germany, the New Orleans Museum of Art, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, just to name a few. This etching, one in a series she worked on from 1893 to 1897, is titled The March of the Weavers and depicts exhausted workers in a somber march, their faces etched with despair and quiet determination. The bold, rough lines capture the grinding injustice of industrial labor, a theme still resonant today. It stands as an early testament to Kollwitz's commitment to social realism. Seeing the suffering of the poorer members of society in the ghettos of Berlin around the turn of the 20th century, Kollwitz's work often emphasizes the despair felt by World War I and the economic fallout that followed. Many turned to alcohol, unsurprisingly, during these desperate years, ending their lives in terrible ways, as shown here in The Homecoming, a photolithograph completed in 1927 for the Working Committee of Greater Berlin for the Alcohol-Free Upbringing of Youth. Traumatized by war and economic fallout, many, sadly, chose to meet their end in this tragic way. Another stark reality of struggle, Kollwitz's The Last Thing, a woodcutting completed in 1924, depicts the struggle of many elderly Germans who were left economically destitute and many without children, having perished in World War I. Sadly, many resorted to the measures you see depicted here in Kollwitz's emotionally hard-hitting piece. Devastated by the death of her younger son, Peter, in World War I, Kollwitz knew the toll firsthand of that sacrifice, and while she is stylistically indebted to naturalism, she eventually simplified her compositions to make them more emotionally resonant, as you see here in her piece, Hunger, the Toll of War and Famine on Women and Children. Another example, The Volunteers, depicts her own son in the foreground, Peter, marching next to death, toward war. Completed in 1922, long after his death, Kollwitz embraced pacifism and concentrated her work increasingly on themes of suffering, sacrifice, and mourning, rather than on abstract notions of honor and glory. Her suffering, perfectly displayed in this woodcutting, The Parents, completed also in 1922, shows the grief shared by German parents after learning of the death of their sons in war. Notice again how the thick, dark lines within the wood amplify the emotion of the piece. Another stunning example, The Widow 2, this being a secondary composition in a dual set, the first Widow 1 was shown earlier in this video, is another woodcutting completed in 1922 and published in 1923. It once again shows Kollwitz's undeniable ability to evoke the emotional and physical toll of suffering and mourning after the Great War. And what is war if not sacrifice? In this woodcutting, also from 1922, a mother holds out her young child, alluding to the theme of mothers sacrificing their children in war, and also reminding us that it is often the most vulnerable of our society who suffer the most during and after a war. And we see that representation again in this woodcutting from 1922, the mothers, huddled together trying to protect themselves and their children from war, famine, and poverty. How haunting that this same image resonates so deeply with our modern times. This piece shows the aftershock of loss, the women clinging to those who are left behind and comforting those who have lost as much as they have. The theme continues with her 1922 woodcutting, The People. Emaciated, the dark lines emphasize the subject's struggle, with the small child peering from behind their mother's hand. Kollwitz perfectly conveys the struggle felt by many during and after the war. Turning now to probably one of her most famous post-war critiques, can be seen in this stunning woodcut on washi from 1920, In Memoriam, Karl Liebknecht, depicting the mourners in procession next to the socialist leader's lifeless body. Karl Liebknecht was a German socialist anti-militarist and co-founder of the Communist Party of Germany. He opposed World War I and was a key figure in the 1919 Spartacist uprising, which sought to establish a socialist republic. Arrested and executed by the Freikorps in January 1919, he became a martyr for the leftist movement in Germany. Kollwitz's political activism was a primary component of her art as displayed in this lithograph from 1921 titled Help Russia. It boldly calls for aid to starving Russians after the Great War. As she aged, her work focused more and more on her mortality. Here, depicted in Death Seizes a Woman, a beautiful lithograph completed in 1934, we see the embodiment of death sneaking up behind an unsuspecting woman, caught completely off guard, but yet welcoming its embrace. She continued to portray women and children being surprised by a ghost-like embodiment of death, as seen here in her work Death Grabbing at a Group of Children from her Death series. In fact, 10 years before completing her work on this series, Kollwitz noted in her diary the words, "I must do the prints on death. Must, must, must." In the 1930s, her lithographs from this time focused primarily on this very subject, again seeing it here in her work, Young Girl in the Lap of Death. She added several more to this series of lithographs before 1937. Her work wasn't all about suffering and mourning, however. Truthfully, the anguish reflected in her later work is the tragic consequence of losing loved ones and seeing that loss all around her, not just once during the First World War, but then again in the Second. It's clear from her earlier work, as shown in this lithograph from 1916, Mother with a Child in Her Arms, the joy she experienced as a mother herself. Interestingly, Kollwitz had become the first woman elected to the Prussian Academy of Arts in 1919, but because her work was seen as degenerate by the Nazis for reflecting themes of suffering and loss, she was expelled from her position in 1933 and prohibited from ever exhibiting again, as her work did not reflect the glorified violence trumpeted by the Nazi Party. Käthe Kollwitz passed away in 1945, just 2 weeks before Germany's surrender to Allied forces. Her work regained some popularity during Germany's Reconstruction period, not surprising as the lessons from the First World War were repeated in the Second. Kollwitz's work doesn't just depict the pain of her time, but resonates through every conflict thereafter, revealing how humanity struggles with the same cycles of war, disease, famine, death, loss, pain, and endurance. Thank you so much for watching this celebration of one of Germany's greatest expressionists. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking and following us for more content on history's greatest artists.